back to another live stream. We've got Dave Folks, Professor Steve Keen, and Professor Mike Radzicki. We're going to be talking about maybe lineages of economics and how certain figures form certain schools. We've got a tree. We've got a causal loop diagram created by somebody on the internet, pre-internet, somebody that has obsessive compulsive disorder. I don't know who made this chart, but it's sure interesting. Stay tuned.
You are now relearning economics.
Last week was our most viewed stream yet on my little channel, so thank you everybody that tuned in. If you're coming from the Prof. Steve Keen YouTube channel community post, make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. I do streams with Steve once a week, so if you want more of Steve, you can come to my channel and get more of Steve. I also do system dynamic tutorial videos on this channel if you become a paid member. So there's that. If you want to do that, you can follow me on my Patreon, patreon.com/relearningeconomics. Today we're going to talk about, what did Mike correct me on? The thought of economic history, the history of economic thought. That's the one. We're going to talk about that today. And I've got an interesting diagram here. It's a plate of spaghetti, but we'll zoom into it. And this person proposes, that there's some causal linkages between certain figures and economic schools. A crazy person would make this. I wouldn't even make it, and I'm crazy. And then I looked at the corner, it says Mike Radzicki on it. So the crazy person is Mike Radzicki. And of course that figures. I do live streams with Mike and I only associate with crazies. So this is going to be exciting. We're going to go through it. Now, if we can't go through it all today, we'll do another stream next week and cover the rest, because there's going to be a lot there. And I want to make sure we get to the questions. And I highly recommend you guys, if you got questions as we go through this diagram, put them in the chat, put a Q or question in front of it. And then in the second half of the show, we'll try to address those questions. Or if you've got a statement, if you disagree, maybe you don't think that causal line should be pointing from one person to another person to a school, maybe you got a different idea, and we would love to hear it. I'm gonna take it. You know what? Who hasn't been here in a while? Dave. So let's bring on Dave. I don't have claps or anything like that. Dave, how you doing? Dave is muted, so this is a good thing. He's quiet. You've got a great camera. I can't hear a damn thing you're saying. Now wait. Just making sure it's no, it's a Dave issue. You just cut right off. I'm just gonna roll on to the next person, and you can figure that out. Let's bring in Mike. Now my headphones are screwed. Hold on. There we go. Hold on. Live on the Relearning Economics channel, where I can't hear anything. Okay, now I can hear you, Mike.
Okay, well,
how you doing?
Doing well.
Good
to see you.
Good, yeah. So how do you? I found that chart. I thought it was really interesting. I didn't even see your name at the bottom right-hand corner at first. I was a causal kind of loop diagram. I always get interested by those, so I open it, make it a little bigger so I could see it. And then I was thinking, as I was going through the lines, still not looking at the author at the bottom, I'm like, whoever did this is slightly crazy, because this is a lot of work and a lot of thinking. And there might be, some mental health issues going on there. But I thought, you know what? I appreciate even autistic minds. I think autistic minds are the greatest thinking minds out there. So, and then I saw your name in the corner. I was like, holy shit, Mike did this. This guy's fucking crazy. Anyways, and I thought, perfect. We got a live stream idea. So anyways, I kind of want to know before I bring in Steve, what the context of that causal loop diagram is, where it was from, what you were working on at the time, and why you needed to figure all that out.
Well, yeah, I haven't seen that in a little while. I think its claim to fame, when it first came out, I was asked by the University of Bremen in Germany if they could blow it up and put it over the doorway to their econ department. And I said, yeah, I'm glad somebody can use it, whether it's still there or ever. I don't even know if they ever did it, but that's the only other claim to fame from that article. So that appeared in an article that was a special issue of that journal, honoring a guy by the name of Hamilton, an economist by the name of Hamilton, I think David Hamilton. This is like 23 years ago. And they asked me if I would talk about how system dynamics modeling related to institutional economics in general and the work of David Hamilton in particular. So I'm like, all right, what to do? And my argument has been for many, many, many years that the rap by system dynamics professionals, including Jay Forrester himself, always was economists hate system dynamics. They don't understand it. They don't use it, and what have you. And economists would pick on system dynamicists. So there was this conflict. And when I came along, I said to Forrester, it's not all economists who would hate system dynamics. Some of them will, because economists self-select themselves into schools of thought, they group themselves around the same journals, the same conferences, the same course materials. They train and swap PhD students, and they all agree within their school how to do economics properly. And if you're not in their school, they kind of disagree. I said, you're talking to economists who do science, economic science, quotation fingers, in a manner that is just not consistent with system dynamics. So of course, they're not going to think what you're doing is scientifically valid. But other economists and other schools of thought do economics in a system dynamics-like manner. You've got to talk to those economists. And so that was my mission, was to unite these groups. So David Hamilton was retiring. Can we do an issue that honors him? And can I talk about this? So it was the idea of schools of thought. Economists organize themselves, self-organize themselves into schools of thought. So I said to myself, what are the schools of thought? So all of this, by the way, started on a napkin. Like the Laffer curve started on a napkin, right? As did the idea for Amazon. And I believe the Citibank logo. So lots of things start on napkins. So this started on a napkin. And I just started from memory saying, well, what are the schools of thought, and who's are the main people in those schools of thought? And then where did they get trained, or who influenced them? And I started working kind of backwards. And I said, well, the whole thing kind of starts with Adam Smith or Keynes, kind of in the 18th century. And one thing led to another. And I had this giant napkin. And I said, I better formalize this. I can use this in that paper. So that, in a nutshell, is why I did it, how it happened. And well, it's arisen from the ashes today, apparently.
So my dog food just came. I'm going to bring on Steve. I'm going to let you and Steve kind of just talk a little more on the topic of your diagram. I'll be right back. Enjoy.
All right.
Apparently I'm Steve. I can be Steve.
Ty is still there, and Dave is there. How you doing, Dave?
Hey, good to see you. G'day, mate. How's it going?
Yeah, right. I know.
I can do a possible Australian accent.
The guy with the engineering shirt was pressing the wrong buttons or something.
At least you can hear me now. Hey, do economists only have napkins to work with? I mean, are there other things that you can?
I think economists like to think about stuff when they're eating, and the closest thing they can write on is a napkin would be my guess. But
okay, well, I guess that makes more sense than what I was thinking, which was literally all they've got to work on. They haven't discovered computers, haven't got that far. We just still got pencils and or biros and napkins in restaurants
Well,
usually
yeah,
with the Laffer curve anyway.
back in the day, and I guess nobody wanted to read our stuff on a latrine stall wall, so we go with the napkins, I guess. But anyway, Dave, good to see you. Are you in England right now, UK?
Yeah. Back in England. I had a stint out in Australia for a month in October, which was really nice. Just my daughter and I went down to Australia. I was in a big event down there doing the world champs for my age group, which is basically triathlon without the run. That was fun. And then did a bit of a road trip with my daughter. It was good laugh, actually. So I've had a nice away time. But good to be back. Well, I say good to be back. I'm back in the freezing cold in a English January, which is probably not too different from where you are, but yeah.
All right. Well, that sounded like a lot of fun, actually.
Yeah, it was good. It was good. So this diagram that I got to see before I came on that Ty sent me was like, so I picked of all the weeks to come back, I picked the week that I get. Okay, Dave, we're going to talk about this. Like, okay, the non-economist turns up and we get to talk about a plate of spaghetti with a whole lot of econ words in it. This will be good.
Yeah. One odd thing is time is usually graphed going from left to right, but in that diagram, it goes from top to bottom. And broadly, the schools of thought, there are more schools of thought on there that I haven't circled because it was for that particular journal. So I circled kind of the heterodox schools of thought. And roughly, if you put a line down the middle, I said time goes from top to bottom. But if you go from side to side, on the left-hand side of the diagram are schools of thought that are free market oriented. And the right-hand side are more statist, or the government has to get involved in economic activity side of the aisle. And broadly, the schools of thought on either side of the dividing line kind of get along. They're slicing the cheese a little thin. They disagree on some of the details, but they broadly agree on either the free market stuff or the government involvement stuff. So Mike, if you're to quickly look at it, that's what's going on.
That's good. Mike, let's start right from the top. I'm interested. We start Quincy right at the top, and then it goes to Smith and Marx, and then Ricardo's kind of right after Smith, but goes down to Marx. So with those four individuals, because this is the origin point of your diagram. Kind of start with them. I'm interested on what the division is from going to Smith and going to Marx, and how Smith influenced Ricardo and Ricardo influenced Marx. Kind of give me a description on that area of the chart.
Well, again, I did this some 23, 24 years ago, but so my thought process was, the traditional classical economists are Smith, Ricardo, and Malthus, right? And they were all familiar with each other's work. Smith was the older of them, and Ricardo was responsible for, among other things, a labor theory of value, and Marx kind of ran with that. Keynes preceded Smith by a little bit, and he kind of produced possibly the first sort of formal economic analysis, I guess, as I'm remembering. Keynes was, a physiocrat. The value came from the land. So obviously, I'm not entirely sure why I had drawn the link from Keynes to Marx. I'm much more.
I can help you out there.
I'm much more removed from my history of economic thought graduate work than I was 23, 24 years ago. But yeah, Steve, hop in, please, and save me.
Okay. Look, if I was going to start a chart as to where economics should have started, my model would be to look at how the Catholic religion shows the development of religions over time versus how the Protestant religion does. Okay? And what the Catholics have is they show this perfectly straight line from Jesus to the popes to round about where the Reformation begins. Everything deviates to the side. You got the Protestants coming down there, okay? and then they rework it. And what the Protestants show instead is that the church starts off with Jesus, then it goes the wrong way, and the Protestants correct it to bring it back into the right line again. So you can't get away from your own sort of ideological or political interpretation of the patterns that exist. So I've actually just recently written a little Whig history. And
Whig
Mike,
history.
yeah, I knew I'd get a question about that. Mike, you want to explain what a Whig history is?
The history of the
You
Whigs.
don't know?
as in the Tories, like the political
Exactly.
party.
Her Majesty's
English political
royal
party.
opposition, or
That's why I use the example of the Catholic religion versus the Protestant religion, and how they show the development of religion over time from Jesus forward. They both accept Jesus as God, but their interpretation of what the religions have done are completely divergent. Well, a Whig history is where you write history from your point of view and say, these are the people that led to me. Okay, so I did one of those just recently. This is part of the next book I'm working on, and I start with Keynesian, because my feeling is if we wanted to get a decent, actually I started even further back with Turgot and I was really thinking, my name's just, since the name's just frozen, but
Manville?
Sorry?
Manville, History of the Bees?
No, not Mandeville. Mandeville's reasonable, but the people who understood that all wealth comes from nature. Yeah, this is what people talk about Keynesian and say Keynesian said land is the source of all value. When you look at how they wrote about it, they really basically understood the laws of thermodynamics and the role of energy before even the word energy was invented. So Turgot says it most beautifully. He said the husbandman, the term they use for the farmer, is the source of all wealth, and the reason the source of all wealth, he's the one who gets the free gift of nature, and the free gift of nature we now call energy. And without energy, you can't produce anything. We now know all that, and a century after the physiocrats disappeared. So I'd start with Keynesian and Cantillon, the one I'm trying to think of, Richard Cantillon.
Yeah.
So Cantillon, Keynesian, and Turgot, I'd start as where we should have begun. That's where you had the God moment in terms of any understanding of how things are produced on this planet. They got it right. And then I have Smith causing a deviation from the side, because Smith's Cantillon wrote in French, even though I think he was Irish, and his first book was translated into English in about 1759 or something like that. Well, Smith comes out in 1776 with The Wealth of Nations, and everybody, the standard histories of economic thought say he's the father of economics. So Smith is the father. It all follows on from Smith. When you compare Cantillon to Smith, and I think there's literally about 11 years between the two authors, Cantillon starts up by saying land is the source of all value and wealth. Okay. And then what does Smith say? Labor is the source of all value and wealth. And yeah, there we go. That's that beautiful quote there from Richard Cantillon. So land is a source of matter from which all wealth is drawn. Man's labor provides the form for its production, and wealth itself is nothing but the food and conveniences, yada, yada, yada. You read Smith and he starts with almost exactly the same sentence, except he substitutes labor for land. And what that means is you've got a proposition which from Cantillon and Turgot and the physiocrats, you get the perspective that wealth originates in nature, and then we use what we find in nature to create a higher quality of living for ourselves than the other animals on the planet can manage, because fundamentally we're consuming more energy. Okay,
the only quote I remember from my history of economic thought from Cantillon is that men multiply like rats in a barn. That's the only thing I can remember from his writing.
I think you should go back and read a bit more. And you can substitute Malthus for that one anyway, of course. But yeah, but the basic thing is, if we'd stuck with what the physiocrats got right, we'd have sensible economics today. Instead, we got deviated and pushed off the side by Smith. And then Smith gave us labor as the source of value. That led to Marx and the labor theory of value. That led to clashes with neoclassicals over what was the basis of profit, because according to Marx it was exploitation of labor. The neoclassicals came back and said, no, it's the marginal productivity of capital that determines the return capital gets. We've wasted 2.5 centuries in all those battles, and then finally with the development of modern ecological economics, and my own little contribution, the little one-liner that labor without energy is a corpse, capital without energy is a sculpture, means that I can then say that that you can go back and say all the wealth we produce is only because we can exploit energy that we didn't create. The big mistake in going from Cantillon with land to Smith with labour is that Smith's argument makes all of the productivity of capitalism appear to occur within capitalism itself. There's no need for nature in that perspective. From Cantillon and from Quenet and Turgot and so on, land is absolutely essential. Without land, there is no productivity. What they meant basically in our terms is without energy, nothing can be produced. And they're right and Smith was wrong. So my history would be like the way the Protestants describe the development of religion over time. You start with Jesus, and my Jesus would be Quenet or Cantillon or Turgot. They're basically physiocrats. We get pushed off to the side courtesy of Smith. There's 2.5 centuries of garbage, some good stuff amongst all of this, of course, but then we can now bring it back to a reasonable foundation. But we've wasted 2 centuries in getting there. So yeah, so I'd be doing a bit more. I'd be putting it into good and bad developments and where the good stuff was done. Yours is you want to have a crack at trying to explain this one, mate, because it's a fascinating diagram. I do agree, but I'd be writing a different style of one.
So there's if you put the whole diagram up real quick, I'll tell you a quick sidebar story that's kind of interesting. Okay. There's you see in the about 1/3 of the way through, about halfway down, Richard Goodwin is listed in there. Right?
One of my good mates, yeah.
And then up in the upper right of the figure, there's Schumpeter.
Mm-hmm.
And I revised this diagram several years later because I had dinner with Richard Goodwin.
Oh, right. Tell me about that. I really want to hear about that. Yeah.
Yeah, he was telling me a story about how he was the only person on the planet, as far as he knew, that was Joseph Schumpeter's student and teacher.
Of course, because he taught him mathematics. I saw the same story. Elaborate. Yeah.
He said that he made a deal with Schumpeter that if Schumpeter would teach him economics, Goodwin would teach him mathematics, because he was very good at mathematics. Schumpeter was terrible, apparently, at it.
Yeah, he was.
Goodwin was so good at math that the Harvard physics department during World War II had him teaching physics classes.
Wow.
You can imagine that would be unheard of today. But yeah, so he told me that little sidebar at dinner. We were at the University of Texas at a complexity conference.
Oh, right. How long ago was that?
Oh, quite some time ago. Might have been 1989 or something like that. I had forgotten the story.
Yeah.
Steve, I've got a question.
Yes, mate.
If I can ask, so you mentioned religious thought, which of course comes into this to some degree, but I know it's half joking, but where does Calvinism and Puritanism fit in terms of what it changed? It changed the dialogue that we have about labor and almost made it sacrosanct. So it doesn't fit on this map because it's not seen as an economic school of thought, but it's had a lot of cultural influence. So I wondered, since we're talking about religion, where it fits, if anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, what the Protestant religion did is say you get to heaven through good works. And good works means being industrious and producing new technologies. And therefore, as well as going to church on a Saturday or Sunday, you also worship God by creating new technology, and you live a relatively frugal life because your reward comes in heaven later. But you live well, but frugally compared to what you could live, because rather than putting your money into ostentatious consumption, you put it into investment, developing new products and improving life on earth, and your reward is a better life in heaven. So that's the sort of Protestant side of things. And you can sort of see that in the 19th century arguments of the classical school of economics, because they did justify the returns to capital in terms of innovation. And that's forgotten by the neoclassicals. They talk in terms of, marginal productivity, and there's no innovation going on there. So I think you can definitely say it influences, particularly American economics. For all flavors of American economics, there's a strong belief in the sort of the puritanical attitude towards labor and work that's absolutely essential. Whereas if you
a lot of them, Calvinists in particular were escaping persecution in Europe, weren't they? So they went to the
Yeah.
States, and so they were early on in shaping the dialogue of how people would, relate to the economic structures that were around them. So I think it had a bigger influence, probably than we talk about. But yeah, it's interesting that Mike's not a dig. There's no way they're economists or considered economists, any of these religious people. But I just thought it was an interesting point that Steve raised, because it is background noise to a lot of economic thought. And when I look at these maps of thought, I wonder what other currents are in there that we don't talk about, because we talk about them in academic terms only. But there's, of course, these worldviews underneath them as well.
Yeah.
Well, so what we're talking about here is really fundamental, not just to economics, but really to all of the political debates we're having these days, certainly in the States. The idea that the capitalist system is fair and just, or it's exploitative and it's a function of power, relative power, and what have you. And so, where does economic value come from? Is it from the land? Is it from labor, and the capitalists take it away or exploit it? Does it come from subjective valuation? What is that thing worth? Well, what am I willing to pay for it, kind of thing? And it's not just where does the value come from, but how are the economic spoils distributed? Are profits due to the marginal productivity of capital? We pivot to the Cambridge capital controversies, or as Schraffa, and really going back to Ricardo, I guess, suggested, no, that's not at all true. The capitalists get what they get due to relative power relationships. This is fundamental to our political economy, these questions.
So let's go back to the top. I love it how you guys just kind of derail my plans.
We try hard. Yeah, we conspire
and we do
before we line up on the.
Even when we don't try, we do it.
That's right. Yeah, natural talents, really. Yeah.
Now, thankfully, we're not pulling out encyclopedias from the 1300s this week, but I'm sure we'll get there eventually. I'm kind of interested if we go back to the top of the chart, because Mike, you said that this is dimensioned from top to bottom in time, and then from left to right, left being more free market and right being more I don't know, social, whatever you want to call it. If we look at Smith, it goes to Say, and it goes down to Marshall, Pigot, Jevons, Manger, Walrus. I kind of want to know why Smith influenced, because that's kind of the start of the marginalist kind of free market side, and it also kind of went over to Ricardo and Marx. I want to know what part did like Marshall and Pigot and Jevons kind of take from Smith, and what parts did Ricardo take from Smith? Is there a differentiation there? And if there is, can you explain it?
Well, I think going back, a quarter of a decade, my thinking was that Keynes defined the classical economists not as Smith, Malthus, and Ricardo, but any economist who believed that Say's law was true, that supply creates its own demand, right? And so, there might have been, I'm not entirely sure, I'm not sure if Say was a physiocrat as well. Maybe there should have been a line from Keynes to Say as well. But certainly Smith started it all. And so I'm assuming, a long time ago, that Say was familiar with Smith's work.
He was, and there's actually a funny tale. I don't know enough detail about it, mate, but this is more anecdotal than my usual level of recall. But Say was what Say focused on was the sort of Mandeville side of Smith, talking about how capitalism is the system that liberates people, enables great innovation to occur, and the market system is wonderful. And this is all, of course, Say was in France. I don't know quite where he was physically based in France, presumably Paris, but he was in France, which, of course, was non-industrial at the time he was writing compared to Scotland. So he decided to make a homage trip at one stage after Smith's death, I think, to go to where Smith developed his ideas in Edinburgh. And he only got about 3/4 of the way there before the pollution drove him crazy. The dark satanic mills, I've forgotten who wrote that phrase, that was a poet who wrote those particular phrases, but he saw these dark satanic mills. Pollution was dreadful. Wastage of the landscape was horrible. He didn't even make it to Edinburgh. He went back to France. So he was inspired by the libertarian side of Smith, laissez-faire. And in that sense, you can find laissez-faire was actually a physiocratic phrase, and mainly that was directed at the feudal impulse that existed in the French economy to take the surplus being generated on the farms by the peasants and then move it to Versailles. And they were absentee landlords in that classic sense. And Quenet was trying to encourage the French nobility to take more interest in agriculture and reduce the impulse, because he said if you can make a small change to effectively what we now call the input-output dynamics of producing food, a small improvement in efficiency will give you a large increase in the surplus that you get to enjoy at the other end. And what they were arguing against was the feudalism, truly extreme feudalism. That's where the let them eat cake line came from, Marie Antoinette. And they wanted to remove those imposts to make the place more liberal, to enable the capitalist type developments to occur, which were happening in English farming but weren't happening in French farming. So in that sense, laissez-faire stuff starts with the physiocrats and Mandeville and so on, influences Smith. That's the side of Smith that Say focuses upon. But Smith believed in a objective theory of value. He argued that the value reflected effort fundamentally. Whereas Say I regard Say as the original neoclassical, because he says value is utility, and anything that adds utility to a product adds value. And of course, that's become the focus of neoclassical economics. So I think what you've got there in your link from Smith to Say to Marshall, and you've got Marshall, Pigou, Givens, Menger, Walras, Pareto, that's absolutely valid, because in many ways, Say was the original person to put forward the utility maximizing subjective theory of value arguments. And of course, he was a rival, a foil of Ricardo, but at the same time, a good friend of Ricardo's, a pen pals, effectively. But Say took that libertarian side of both the physiocrats and Smith, turned it into a utility-based theory of value rather than effort-based theory of value. And that was all codified by Marshall and Jevons and Menger in about the 1870s.
As a sidebar, again, I think I remember a paper by William Baumol, maybe in the Journal of Economic Perspectives a long time ago, where he did a deep dive on Say, and he could find no evidence that Say ever said supply creates its own demand, even though it's known as Say's law.
Yeah.
He obviously would have said it in French, but at any rate, that doesn't mean he didn't say it. Just
what he did say, and this is where the neoclassical stuff comes from. I'll find the actual quote and read it out, because I think it's extremely important to have this in the mind. But he dismissed the importance of money. Okay, Say was one of the first ones to say money doesn't matter. Okay, what actually matters is capitalists want goods. Their money is just a transitory thing. And so the whole neoclassical argument of leaving the monetary system out originates with Say.
We have him to blame.
Okay, so let's just keep this moving along, because I want to get through this diagram. And I'm going to just call this the group of six, or the group of idiots, Marshall, etc. How did they influence Keynes? Because, I have an opinion on when I read the general theory, I see that he's trapped in a lot of classical thinking. At the time, it was classical economics, not neoclassical economics. I saw, in a lot of his writing, he was still stuck in a frame of thought that was faulty. And I assume, just by your diagram, I can relate to, that group of six there did have a heavy influence on Keynes, but maybe you can expand a little more on your thought process when you drew that arrow from Say and Marshall and Pigou, et cetera, to Keynes. What exactly were those influences on Lord Keynes? Lord Keynes,
not Ty Keynes. So again,
Just to
Yeah,
be
we got to
clear.
make sure that we know which one Keynes we're talking about.
Uh,
So Keynes said in the general theory, I'm addressing this to my fellow economists and any economist who believes Say's law is true, like my teacher, Alfred Marshall, who convinced Keynes to leave probability theory and mathematics and go into economics, and his contemporary Pigou, if you guys believe Say's law is true, I'm going to call you classical economists, and I'm going to show you that you're wrong, that Say's law is not true, that supply doesn't create its own demand. And so Keynes talked a lot about how hard it was to break from the thinking of his teachers, the way he was taught to think about economics. And, a lot of historians of economic thought have said Keynes never really entirely separated himself from Marshall. I can remember the economist Jan Kregel told me once that he spent some time, I think he did his PhD at Rutgers in the States, but he spent a year at Cambridge working with Mrs. Robinson. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, but as I remember the story, he said to me that, well, my first meeting with Mrs. Robinson was because he was there to do post-Keynesian. Well, of course, you've read Marshall. And he said, no, I never read Marshall. And she said, well, don't come back here to my office until you've read Marshall, because it all starts with Marshall. You can't understand Keynes until you understand Marshall, his teacher.
But I think that you can actually find it I think it's the French preface to the 1939 edition of the General Theory, where Keynes said he's trying to integrate integrate the general theory of economics with the role of money, and a large part of his thinking is trying to make it basic on supply and demand. Okay, Keynes was surrounded by people like Schaffer, who trashed the whole idea of marginal thinking. But in one part of again of the general theory, and also the responses to it, what was trashed by Schaffer was the whole idea of diminishing marginal productivity, because he said basically as you add more labor, you add labor in conjunction with the machines. Nobody has this crazy concept of fixed and putting more and more variable units onto a fixed unit. Schaffer was a supporter of the original classical school, the argument that value is set by effort rather than by utility. But he also rejected supply and demand analysis, and to get supply and demand analysis, you've got to have diminishing marginal productivity, and that's one thing which Keynes defended. Just said if there's one concept from our benighted discipline, surely this marginal productivity is part of it, and that was a mistake. There's lots and lots of Ricardian of Marshallian ideas that you find in the general theory, but you also find the best parts of the general theory are where Keynes is trashing those ideas, talking about uncertainty. And as soon as you've got uncertainty, that's the end of the idea of anything, marginal this and marginal that. You've got huge discontinuities. So I think it's Marshall was he was what Keynes was taught, but is what Keynes was trying to escape from at the same time. And the general theory I largely regarded as a mess on that front. But when you get to the responses Keynes wrote in the general theory in 1937, he'd finally cleared a lot of those ideas out. And I would love to see where Keynes would have got to if the war hadn't come along and if he hadn't been, died so young in 1946. So he was breaking away from Marshall, but certainly that's where he started at the same time.
I think Ricardo's concept of law and diminishing productivity probably came not from fixed capital, but from a fixed island, the UK.
Oh yeah, no, this
cultural production.
Ricardo's idea of diminishing output from land, which was the explanation he gave for rent, and it was basically about the quality of land declining as you increase production. And neoclassicals grabbed that, didn't want to talk about declining quality of workers. They had to get an extra explanation to why profit came about. Their explanation for profit is the same as Ricardo's explanation for rent in many ways, but they, who's garbage. Their theory is just nonsense. So I would, you're making me feel a bit tempted to try to put my own diagram together, but to include those divisions about value based on effort versus value based on subjective utility, and so on. The role of energy being taken seriously, whereas versus ignored. There's all these things that you find in this huge jungle of the history of economic thought and the various influences that people have been subjected to.
So I urge you, Steve, if you go ahead and do that, to please start on a napkin and go.
Maintain the tradition.
By law.
Got to start on a napkin. Okay.
Yeah, and I think just let me chime in real quick. Yeah, the economists divide the world, a theoretical world, a lot of times into the long run and the short run. And Steve is right. In the short run, capital is fixed, technology is fixed, and you just vary labor, and then you get diminishing marginal productivity and all that. And that Keynes kind of worked in that short run time frame. That's
unfortunately,
Herod came along and said, "I'm going to generalize the general theory to the long period."
Steve, we have a question from Tony.
Not Tony. Oh dear. Okay,
Steve, if economic theory doesn't include money, then how did the obsession with GDP happen? Because GDP is nothing but a measure of monetary flow in an economy. Steve, can you answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, GDP was always designed to try to talk about real output, okay, rather than monetary. But they had to measure it in monetary terms and then deflate it to get the real, so-called real elements to it. But I want to come back to that point about economists ignoring money, because that again is a huge divide. Neoclassicals trivialize the role of money, and post-Keynesians and sensible people regard money as a critical element of capitalism. You can't explain it without it. But this is the sort of garbage that Say used to spout, that I think led to the neoclassical attitude towards seeing capitalism as a barter system. So he wrote what is called the Catechism of Political Economy. And this is his attempt to say, I get asked by a parishioner, and I'm the priest. So I tell them, the parishioner asks a question, I answer it. That's the catechism. So in answer to one of these made-up questions by Say, he says, every producer asks for money in exchange for his products only for the purpose of employing that money again immediately in the purchase of other products. For we do not consume money, and it is not sought after in ordinary circumstances to conceal it. Thus, when a producer desires to exchange his product for money, he may be considered as already asking for the merchandise which he proposes to buy with this money. It is thus that producers, though they have all of them the air of demanding money for their goods, do in reality demand merchandise for their merchandise. Now, Marx rubbished that and basically said that's describing petty commodity production. It's not capitalism. And Marx's statement, which is actually in Capital, was accumulate. That is Marx. That is Moses and the prophets. And the whole idea that capitalists aren't there for the money is just a farce. But that portrayal of capitalism as a system of simple commodity production, where you're only being a capitalist so you can buy the next Lamborghini you're going to need to get to work tomorrow, because Lamborghini you bought yesterday is worn out. It's just nonsense to say it's about the commodities. It's about accumulation of money. So that's Say was the source of that, and that neoclassicals are still infected with that idea more than 2 centuries later.
Yeah, so the early classical economists, Smith, Ricardo, Malthus, they had an idea of the steady state economy, that the economy would grow, and then, you kind of hit the water's edge of England, and it would reach a steady state. In other words, with a traditional sort of simple corn model, the output is corn from the land, and you pay the labor a subsistence wage. You got to keep them alive, your peasants or whatever. And then what remains is given to the aristocrats in the form of rent, the landowners, and then the capitalists who organize the means of production. The capitalists invest in growing their industry, so they plant more corn, but the land is of lesser quality because you use the best land first. You got to keep the workers alive, so you still got to pay them their subsistence wage, still got to pay the aristocrats, the dukes and the lords, so profit falls a little bit, and you keep going until profit goes to zero. But notice what happened when the GDP, corn in my example, is distributed, right? The workers get wages, they're fed. The aristocrats, the landowners get the rent, and the capitalists get the profits. But in modern terms, we have wages, rent, profits, and interest. So originally there was no money, right? The bankers, the financiers weren't in that story.
Hold on. Financiers? Say that again. Financer. I like that.
Financiers.
Financers.
You can do the Canadian pronunciation if you want. That's fine.
I think I'm doing the correct English pronunciation, not the redneck American pronunciation.
At any rate, they left. Now we cut these guys some slack, right? They're working with a quill pen and an inkwell on some scroll, what have you, right? So, the fact that they didn't know 200 years ago what we know today, maybe we'll cut them a little slack. But a lot of this is, sort of path dependent, right? The 3 means of production and 3 returns kind of gets into the story that's taught to the next generation and what have you. And so in some sense, maybe it's historical precedent that the banking sector, the finance sector was not included in the standard story, in the standard thinking about it, standard modeling and what have you. And of course, as Steve has pointed out, big error by leaving that out.
So everybody make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell. I appreciate you tuning in. This is a lot of fun. Mike, I want to carry on now to the left hand of your panel in the middle here. And since I know you're actually a hardened closet Austrian economist, I kind of want to go through this. And if we kind of go and start up from like the Jevons, Manger, Walrus, a group of people, I want you to kind of, I want you to financiers. I want you to kind of follow the arrows down to the Chicago school, the Austrian economics school. So like in the direction of, and I notice who's not there. You don't have Friedman. Interesting. I want you to kind of go down that line.
Yeah, I do. You look above monetarism, Friedman, Schwartz, Meltzer, Brunner, and Kagan. Go to the Austrian Economic Circle.
Oh, I see it. And the group of 5, the new group of fuckery people that supplanted the old group of fuckery people. Perfect. Yes. Can you kind of describe that lineage, what it was all about? And then we'll let Steve chime in, and then we'll see if Dave is following along.
Yeah, well, so we're on the left-hand side of the diagram, right? So we're in the free market side of the aisle. Remember, by and large, free market economists are not anarchists. They don't think that there should be no government, that you should have warring city-states and militias or something, but rather that the role of government is limited, right? It should be a referee in the economic game, somebody who produces the playing field for the economic game, but does not get in the game and change or influence the outcome of the game. So, there should be a defend the nation so commerce can proceed, have a monetary system, have a legal system, have infrastructure, ports and roads and stuff and what have you. But don't be saying it's unfair that team A had more points, money than team B, and I'll take some from one and give it to the other, or what have you. That side of the aisle gets into how the government is a necessary evil and what should its role be. Now, the Austrians are, as you know, very libertarian-ish. They think government interventions causes cycles or makes them worse rather than damps them, as the Keynesians would say. And Hayek, of course, debated Keynes and New Keynes back in the day. By the way, what I don't like about the Austrians, what I don't like about traditional institutionalists, and if you want to call Mrs. Robinson post-Keynesians, they all did not like formal modeling. And Mrs. Robinson famously would say, I never learned mathematics, so I had to learn how to think. what I tried to do, and this is my teachers when I first came up with the notion of using system dynamics to do heterodox economics, I was talking to people who did case studies, rich narratives describing, like, think of the Harvard case study approach, and they recoiled in horror that this punk kid was trying to mathematize their stuff. But of course, they were thinking, constrained optimization, Lagrangian multipliers, maybe econometrics, and they had no idea what the hell I was talking about. This is, 45 years ago or whatever. So I think they dismissed formal modeling prematurely. And again, they weren't familiar with it. Computers weren't used in their era, so we cut them a little bit of slack. But and you see there's divergences. You'll have the monetarists, money causes everything in the short run, right? Let me back up one step. A big question in macroeconomics is, and this is when they do include money, or they include it correctly or not, and exogenously or endogenously is a whole nother matter. But let's say money somehow makes it into their model or their theory. The question is asked, is it neutral or not? So neutral money means it only changes price level, general level of prices, or the rate or the rate of inflation. And does it only influence the real economy? Hence, it's not neutral all the time or just in the short run. And does it only change prices in the long run and what have you? So the monetarists are big on it's not neutral in the short run, but it's neutral in the long run. But money causes everything, right? The supply siders in that chain of thinking are big into marginal tax rates. They control everything. They both would want a balanced budget, but the supply siders don't want it to happen by they want tax cuts to balance the budget. And I'm not sure what the monetarists would probably say on that, exactly how to get there, whether it's spending changes or whatever. But they disagree on some of the details. I'm trying to remember. Oh, so you also get into, and this might be kind of interesting. When I was a grad student, my dissertation director was big buddies with a lot of the Chicago school economists. So he would drag me along to the University of Chicago's economics department periodically, and we'd sit in on various seminars and what have you, and with Nobel laureates and all that stuff. It was kind of interesting. And you wonder how the monetarist folks there would interact with the rational expectations folks there, the sort of the Bob Lucas types versus the Milton Friedman types. And I never heard how they interacted or what have you, but they're kind of in that lineage over there. One last story, then I'll let Steve weigh in because he'll correct all my errors, I'm sure. When I was a doctoral student, we had a program where every year famous economists would come and spend a week or 10 days with the doctoral students. So Joan Robinson came for a week and we got to hang out with her, and Sam Bowles came for a week, and Paul Davidson came for a week, and Gar Alperovitz came for a week, and Len Rapping came for a week, and then Gary Becker came for a week.
Oh dear.
And the doctoral students were assigned only 1 week to be their like driver, pick them up at their hotel in the morning.
You were the gopher.
Yeah. Sorry?
You're the gopher. Go for them. You go for them somewhere. Go for
them a cup of coffee, hold their coat, whatever had to be done. So I was assigned Gary Becker. And nicest guy on the planet. I love the guy. He was so nice.
Was he?
It was a lot of fun. Super nice guy.
Okay.
But he apologized to me on the first day. He said, my throat is very raspy and sore, and I got to give a lot of talks. And I said, well, in my office, I had a graduate student office. I said, I've got some Russian tea that my wife makes. Would you like me to make you a cup? And he goes, oh, that would be great. So I give him a cup of the stuff, and he goes, that was so good. Oh, thank you so much. So I went home and I told Julie, Gary Becker loved your, so she made him a giant canister of the stuff, and I gave it to him. He's like, oh, this is the greatest. So that's my Gary Becker story, but he was a super nice guy.
That's intriguing. I wouldn't have thought he was a nice guy. I'm glad to hear that he was, because he was responsible for the arguments about applying economic theory to personal relationships. Like one little detail about him. Correct me if I'm wrong on this one, mate, but he was divorced by his wife, and she got, I think, a share of the Nobel Prize after that. May have been
No,
Lucas.
that was Bob Lucas. That was in
Bob
the
Lucas.
divorce
That's right.
agreement.
Yeah.
If he wins the Nobel Prize in the next like 5 years, I get half. And
That's
it was
right,
like
and
in
she
the
did.
5th year he won it.
Yeah, but Gary Becker won it as well, of course,
Yeah.
and it was applying economic theory to domestic relationships. And in one part of it, he said that a husband should continue reading in bed until the marginal utility of him for reading equals the marginal disutility also to him of his wife's complaints. So,
Those long winter evenings must have just flown by.
Oh my God! I mean, I'm no joke. I've got three marriages and 2 divorces under my belt, so I'm hardly anybody to talk about this stuff. But holy shit, that just sounds totally non-empathic. So I'm actually quite amazed to hear that he was a fairly nice guy face to face.
So, Steve, in regards to the causal loop diagram on your screen.
Yep, I'm looking at. I've got a version of it on my own computer, mate. So I might. But in terms of those linkages, what I see as the causal relationship as you go down, going from over through time, as the diagram goes from top to bottom through time, a lot of the changes are really ideologically driven. So, like Milton Friedman argued that he wanted to minimize the role of government, but he realized the need for a police force and a military. Okay? But that made him seem like a lefty to the Lucases and the Barrows of the world. Okay, so they thought it was actually quite left wing of Milton Friedman to be in favour of police forces. We should all pay for the protection we need. Of course, we can see how well that works on the streets of Minnesota. But this they refined the level of ideology over time, and then codified the ideology in what look like economic arguments, but were outright political statements. And I just find this seems to be a trend in economics that because there's so much ideology embedded into the entire range of economic thought, what often happens when somebody refines an idea forward, rather than sort of developing to see in a science where you get pushing a paradigm forward and you then get improvements in how well the paradigm fits the data. This is twisting the paradigm to make it more ideological over time, and that happened both on the left and the right side of that diagram.
Well, that's what I was going to ask about, because of course I'm in over my head in terms of the details that you guys are talking about, all of these economists and economic thought. But if you mapped this diagram onto a diagram of past historical thought about, say, the field of medicine, you'd have courses of leeches, bloodletting, but it would narrow. It would narrow down to today, where we're like, there's broad agreement on how the body functions and how you can treat, a physician can treat somebody, but not with this. Look at and so my question would be, do you see any hope that this convoluted map over the next couple of 100 years would narrow, or is it going to get broader? Is there going to be more mush in there of stuff that may or may not be true?
Dave, I have to say that's the question of the century. That's bloody well put. Okay, it's extremely important.
This is what I turn up for. Just the one question.
You definitely a clarifying question from the outside, and I think the answer, unfortunately, is going to be no, because we've got such extreme ideology buried in the neoclassical and the Austrian way of thinking, and on the other side, Marxist. So the thing which distinguishes post-Keynesians overall is we're pissed off by the ideology either side of us. So people who become post-Keynesians are pissed off with libertarian attitudes on one side and statist attitudes on the other, and say, let's just describe the fucking system. Let's get the description first right before we start talking about how to improve it. Whereas both the left and the right, the Marxist on one extreme and the neoclassicals and Austrians on the other, it'd be much better if we got rid of the government, or much better if we did this and that and the other, and saying, well, you can't even get the bloody system right at the moment. How the hell can you reform a system you don't understand? But I think that tendency is so deeply ingrained in economics that I think we get away from it.
This is where Mike would say it begs for system dynamic modeling.
Oh,
It
absolutely. That's
the
the
system.
solution in many ways. I think because, like this is, again, system dynamics, which, have you got Forrester in that diagram, mate?
No, I confined it to just official economists.
Yeah.
But Jay, towards his deathbed days, didn't tell me directly, but told a good friend of mine who's a system dynamicist, Khalid Saeed, that because Khalid asked him, because Jay knew he was going to pass, and he was 98 years old, and my colleague Khalid Saeed asked him, Jay, what do you think your greatest contribution was? Because, of course, he had done all this servo mechanism work and then digital computer work and system dynamics. And he said, I think it was reforming how calculus is thought about. He thought calculus was taught backwards because nature integrates. It doesn't take derivatives. Traditionally, you learn derivatives first, and then you learn integrals as kind of, well, you just undo the derivatives. They're
the anti-derivative.
He says that's a wrong mindset. Nature integrates. It doesn't take derivatives. Teach integration first. And so he thought, reforming how calculus can be taught or thought about was one thing. And then he also said, I tried to change how economics is done.
Yeah.
And, I did nominate him for the Nobel Prize. And you might say, how the hell could Mike do that?
I do.
Mike? Well, it turns out they ask Nobel laureates for their input, the committee in what Sweden does. And so one of my teachers was Lawrence Klein's doctoral student. His name was Thampy Mammon. He built the first econometric model of India. And so Klein was asked, who should we nominate? So Klein asked his doctoral students or former doctoral students, who was my teacher. And my teacher said, Mike, what do you think? And I said, Jay Forrester. And so he put the name went up the line, and Jay did not win the Nobel Prize in economics.
What a shock. How surprising. Because you can actually see the origins in system dynamics and his reaction to what he read of economic literature in the 1950s. That classic paper where he gave the first report to the MIT management seminar, saying he spent the last few months reading economic papers, and fundamentally, basically, he said the subtext, I'm horrified by this shit. Okay. But he said
he tried to be polite, but
it's just, I mean, you said they use algebraic equations. You said these seem particularly unsuited to the issues at hand. Then they do time-based models. They set the time steps equal to the data gaps, like 1 year time steps. He said that's just the wrong way to model this, and everything. I think in many ways the inspiration for him developing system dynamics was seeing how bad economics was at the time.
Yeah. So Jay, if I may, I can chime in a little bit and give you some background. Dave, do you want to say something first? I don't want to hog.
There was just a question there, a statement. Everyone manipulates the truth to their own advantage, except me. I think this comes up a lot, especially when you look at that map of spaghetti thought that Mike's produced. And no disrespect, Mike, of course, but this is impossible to map. But it's impossible to map.
They're called spaghetti diagrams by experts.
When you look at that diagram, you're peering into my mind.
That's it. Yeah. But,
we're sending over an ICE team just to get your mind, get the foreign elements taken out of your mind, mate.
Yeah, and this is just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it, Mike? So, the thing is, it does beg the question: where potentially, and I'm definitely on your guys' side as system dynamics experts and practitioners, but the argument that it's just a version of the truth and we can have whatever we want. I think this is the stuff that gets wheeled out a lot, and with some justification, because I can see that. Someone's got a very good argument. That's their truth. Well, let's just run with that. But then you guys are like, when you talk about it, not just empirically, this is different. And I think this is a really good way to try and explain it, because you've helped me sort of understand it a bit more. When you're looking at system dynamics as a dynamic system, it's completely different from just measuring the kind of static things that neoclassicals have done. So I wonder if there's just a way to unpack that a bit more, if you know what I mean.
Well, I mean, I would like to see it progressing towards system dynamics, because Forrester doing it, trying to bring it in 70 years ago, and he didn't fail. He was basically assassinated by the neoclassicals, and particularly William Nordhaus. Of course, Nordhaus trashed was it World Dynamics, Mike? That
World
the 72.
Trashed.
Yeah, he trashed that. complete lack of understanding of it, believing equilibrium was the same argument as he believed equilibrium included system dynamics. It's the opposite in many ways, if anything. But yeah, if we ever get through this mess, it'll have Forrester at the other end. But my feeling is we won't get there.
So
But
one
truth,
thing that
the truth is being this thing sold as this thing that's subjective. Now in mathematics, it's not. In physics, it's not. It's like these are the things, these are the irreducible facts that we've got in underlying nature. And in this space, it's very slippery. And I wonder if there's ever going to be a way out of that with system dynamics.
Well, there could be with that in evolutionary theory, because fundamentally capitalism is a dynamic evolutionary system. And it obviously exists on a biosphere, so it's got to have relations to the physical nature of life on this planet. There's so many things which are clearly objective about the nature of the system, but we've got this subjective clash where people have got different political perspectives, and they infect their economics. And that's again, like in terms of the extent to which you're another dimension with the extent to which you're ideologically driven. And I'd be whacking the left-hand side of this, where you've got Austrian economics, and to some extent the right-hand side where you've got Marxian as the most ideological, and then the one area that's trying to be non-ideological is the post-Keynesians. And basically it's because we've watched all this shit and think, oh, for Christ's sake, let's do something sensible. So the post-Keynesian and the system dynamics is trying to get to that. Let's describe the system first. Let's get an objectively realistic description of the system before we start trying to reform it. Whereas everything else has been driven about, the need to minimize government or make everything state-owned, et cetera, et cetera. Ideology has just made a mess of economics.
Thanks.
So to answer Dave's question directly, with system dynamics, at least according to Jay, it's just the opposite. Jay said, look, there's three kinds of data in the world. There's numerical data. And when people hear the word data, that's what they think of as numbers. And say,
Yeah.
Jay said, yeah, that's a form of data. But there's also written information, and it's a much broader database. And then finally, mental information, mental models, which is the grandest, most abundant data that we have. And he said of the three,
rational actors, for example, yeah.
Jay believed that mental models, mental information was the richest and best source of information that we had for how systems work. And so, yes, we can take numerical data, add it to our models and fit the models to the data and get parameter values from it and what have you. And it's perfectly fine to do that in system dynamics. It's perfectly fine to take written information to read an annual corporate report or minutes of Fed meetings or what have you to help you build a model. But primarily what we do in system dynamics is talk to experts and stakeholders who do whatever it is every day, all day. And if you're talking to them, they're probably not the first day on the job. They're probably senior people. And we ask them, what do you know? Tell me how the system works. And from that, we can build a model. And yeah, we'll fit it to data, whatever. And Jay would say, look, it's not whether or not we're going to use models, because you use them every day. Inside of your head, you don't have an actual corporation, state government, national government, family.
You got a model thereof. Yeah.
You have a mental representation. You have a model.
Yeah.
And
With verbal, whatever else it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't we just make your mental model, or if it's a bunch of you experts, a committee or whatever, the C-suite or whatever, tell me what you guys know, and let's build a collective model where we all agree this is how things work. At least this is our best understanding. And then let the machine do what you can't do, which is mentally think through the dynamics of a highly nonlinear nth degree state system. Then change one thing, and you can't mentally resimulate it accurately and compare the two, but the computer can.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you learn from that. Maybe your mental model wasn't right, or where is a leverage point? Where do we disagree? Whatever. So it's Jay has always said we're just modeling what people tell us, what they think about, what they know, and letting the machine trace out the implications. Final point on the limits to growth, world dynamics. Forster's been accused of doing all these different things, same with Dennis Meadows and all that. And they always said, look, we were hired, given money, grant money by the Club of Rome to represent the world problematique, the predicament of mankind, which was the exponential growth in population causing the exponential use of resources and the exponential generation of pollution, and it's likely to cause problems in the future. And we were asked, can you model that? And so we did. There was their mental model, and we said the most likely future is this if you don't do anything, but it's not preordained. The model can do everything, including generate solo growth model behavior. Nothing's preordained, but the most likely, and it's there to, hey, this is the implications of what these guys are saying. It's there to stimulate conversation, thoughtfulness. We're not saying it's gonna happen on this date or anything like that. So it was very misunderstood, but it's not truth at all. It's sort of a formal representation of a person or a bunch of persons' mental models.
Yeah.
We've got a question here from Michael D'Souza Cruz. When will you acknowledge that corporations are not private, but actually are and always been another branch of government? Michael, I couldn't disagree more, but I'll let Steve take a crack at this first.
Same thing. I mean, corporation. I think that you're more likely to see the government's a branch of the corporations. That's what Marx's attitude was towards me. He said the state is the collective management system for the capitalists. And when you look at how the economy is twisted these days, particularly by the power of the financial sector, then what politicians are putting into place actually is the belief systems of the financial sector, where the financial sector thinks they're essential. Without them, nothing is going to happen. And Marx's attitude, well, they're a bunch of parasites. So, and I think if you can in no way can you say that the government tells the corporations what to do. You can certainly say the corporations are telling the government what to do, with the sole exception of Musk. Not Musk, pardon me, Trump. Sheer lunacy. God knows what's driving that mind.
Or in time of war, maybe like World War II was pretty much the government organizing state and corporations to work together for
That's
to win a war.
That's when we had world wars. That's when they've got a government-run system, and the corporations are told what to do to make the goods they needed. I mean, I actually just saw a little factoid a couple of days ago that I wasn't aware of. Apparently, in 1941 or 42, maybe 43. The production of consumer cars was banned. So for the final 3 years of the war, you were not allowed to make cars. You had to make tanks. Okay, that's when the government's in control, but not now. The corporations definitely dominate the government, and the financial corporations dominate everything.
And Mike, go ahead. Yeah,
I think big corporations and government are intertwined, as are lots of big corporations. There was Steve, you might remember his name. I met him years ago. I was a young pup. His last name was Munkers. Was it Alan Munkers? He was an institutionalist. And he spent a lot of time mapping out interlocking directorates, how the corporate boards are intertwined with one another. Yeah. And of course, they're all intertwined with government. The recent pandemic, first Trump and then Biden called in the pharmaceutical companies and said, blah, 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 do this, do that. We'll buy a billion doses from you or whatever. They made money. The pandemic was addressed, whether it's automobiles and mileage standards and whatever, pushing them into electric vehicles, or as Dave is absolutely right, in wartime production, weapons acquisition and design and all that. And energy. I mean, it is all intertwined by big corporations and big government. And whether government tells the corporations or corporations tell the government, or they all get together and have a scotch and decide, that is what goes on. I'm quite convinced for big decisions.
It's a mush. Is that what you're saying?
And the mush is driven by the economics we can see here. There'll be people, adhering to different views of politics. We'll have different economic perspectives, and without doubt, most of the politics is dominated by the left-hand side of Michael's diagram here, but the right-hand side of politics. Now, the neoclassical approaches, the Austrian approaches. That's all you hear in politics today. So, like again, it'd be interesting to do a diagram showing the extent to which these different classes of economics and approaches to economics have dominated the political discourse. And in that case, you'd completely atrophy the realistic mob. And the interesting thing about your diagram, one of many, Mike, is that it tends to be straight down the middle where the realists are. Okay, you end up with
I agree with that. Yep.
So we've had almost no impact upon government policy. It's all a bunch on the right-wing bunch you've got on the left-hand side of the diagram. They're the ones that have dominated how politics and the economy is reorganized by political decisions. And that's one reason we're in a totally stuffed up state these days.
So I just shared a link privately here in Thai. If you want to show everybody, that's fine. I just remembered, because again, I did this diagram 23, 24 years ago, whatever it was.
Yeah, this is Gonzalo Fonseca's website. Yeah.
Yes. I got a bunch of my understanding of who influenced who by looking at that website. So this is a wonderful source of the summaries of what the great economic thinkers thought, and also who had influenced them to extend somebody's work or disagreed with it or whatever. And I hadn't remembered that till just a moment ago.
Yeah. So. Gonzalo, I think, is now working for the Institute for Economic Thinking these days.
I think so, yeah.
That was a huge amount of work.
He was at the new school.
At the new school,
yeah.
And he did all that work as a student. That was all done while he was studying there.
He didn't make money. He did it a labor of love, I think.
I know.
It was a huge amount of work.
It is important to know how that pattern developed over time and why we are such a mess. But my little take, and I'm putting this again in another book I'm working on, is that you can actually trace the development of economic theory forward from the case of one mistake leading to another mistake to compensate for the previous mistake. So you've got like the physiocrats, they were absolutely right that energy is the source of they didn't say energy, they said the free gift of nature, but that's what energy is, the free gift of nature. So that's the source of wealth. Now Smith reacted to that and said, but the physiocrats, they were right about that, but they thought that only agriculture could exploit the free gift of nature. Manufacturing, which they described as making carriages, they said manufacturing takes what is the surplus that's been produced by agriculture and puts it in a different form. It doesn't actually create anything new. Whereas if you take the energy perspective we all understand now, agriculture benefits from the free gift of nature in terms of solar energy, and manufacturing benefits from solar energy stored from a couple of 100 million years ago in the form of coal and oil. They're still both exploiting the free gift. Now, Smith could have seen that, and Smith could have said, it's not right to say that agriculture is the only source, so is manufacturing, and the proof of that is we use coal to make the manufacturing in Scotland, so we're exporting the free gift of nature too. He could have corrected the mistake of the physiocrats. Instead, what he did was he changed land for labour and made another mistake. And that then led to the value wars, the clashes between the classical schools saying value is effort, the neoclassical saying value is utility. And it's just been, and the messes then get amplified when you reach some sort of conundrum in one of those theories. So one of the things that Keynes pointed out as a real conundrum of the neoclassicals is they can't handle time. And he wrote that beautiful statement saying, I accuse the classical school, by which he meant what we call neoclassical today. I accuse the classical school of being one of those pretty polite techniques designed for a well-paneled boardroom where we cope with the we hang on, I've forgotten the final part. I've got to bring it out of my head. We cope. We try to cope with the future by abstracting from the fact we know very little. We try to cope with the present by abstracting the fact that we know very little about the future. Yeah.
Steve, I asked you to get the quote right. Please go to the new Palgrave behind you and pull that off.
Oh, very funny. Read it. Very funny.
Okay, so we're gonna move along. We got a super chat question here. Thank you, Megex. Thoughts on Howard Scott and the technocrats who were Veblenaites and believed in an energy theory of value? This is way beyond me.
It's beyond me as well, but I thank you for the comment. I've got to look that up. So can you whack that comment in, because I'm not actually aware of the name of Howard Scott. And if they're Veblenaites and believe in an energy theory of value, that's something actually is worth knowing. So if you can just follow that up with a bit of a reference, we'll check it out, and I
Yeah.
can say anything about it next week, but we'll definitely take a look at it.
Can I try to go 2 for 2 on clever questions?
Yes.
And then if this works, I definitely should quit while I'm ahead. So, but and I'll be gone. See you next week. Look at Mike's map, and up the top there, we're talking about mostly agrarian economies that these economists were working with, right, and commenting on and trying to make theories about. Is there anything fundamentally different about the very latest, modern economy that we live in that makes their commentary and their views not irrelevant, but we're talking about are we fighting the last war with some of this thought completely, when actually today things are so fundamentally different, a lot of this stuff is redundant? Or are we still living in the same sort of economy as Marx did, for example?
Look, I'll throw my 5 cents in. You can knock me over, Mike, at the end of it. But I actually think one of the reasons the physiocrats were so correct with the sole mistake of not understanding the role of energy in manufacturing is that they were an agricultural society. And one thing about an agricultural society is when you plant a corn, the corn seed or whatever, you get a cob of corn. And so the output is the same as the input in that sense. And therefore, it's very easy to see that the production that occurred was not because of the labor going into it. It was because of the free gift of nature, because the sun shines on the plant, the rain falls, etc., etc. The farmer's role is to stop the other pests eating it, to hang on as much of it as possible, but they don't actually create that productivity in the first instance. And that was an incredibly important insight. It points out the role of energy. That's why you can read the people like Turgot and see so many. I think one of the most brilliant sentences in history is written by Turgot about the role of energy, fundamentally what we would now call energy, in enabling production. That's lost in the middle. That fog turns up because when you look at manufacturing, your inputs are, take the classic of iron, your inputs are iron ore and coal, and what comes out is a totally transformed product. And the capacity to see the link between one and the other is lost to some extent in the complexity of manufacturing, whereas agriculture made it obvious. And if we continued on with that initial insight and then gone forward with it, we'd have a far better state of economics than we have today.
So I think, Dave, you ask a great question. When the economy was agriculturally based, the economists of that era were observing a particular arrangement of economic activity. Then we moved into the industrial age. Things changed. People came off the farm. Mass production came about, etc. Again, different sort of situation that had to be digested. And now we're more in the information age and heading into AI, robotics, and what have you. So I think the economics has to be rethought a little bit going forward. Now, there has been a rethinking Romer's work of the economics of ideas and rivalrous versus non-rivalrous goods and what have you. So a rivalrous good, if I'm using it, you can't, and vice versa. A non-rivalrous, like an idea or a piece of software, we can both use it at the same time, right? Changes things. Where does technology come from? Changes things. That was a different. But going forward, I think when you're dealing with AI and robotics, the growth of that will determine a lot of the growth of the economy. And the constraint, of course, is going to be electricity and probably the environmental factors. So, there's going to be a demand on the carrying capacity and the carrying capacity going forward. And if robots are making everything and there's plenty for everybody to have, we're going to have to rethink what we mean by employment and unemployment and stuff like that. So I think going forward, it's going to be a different kind of economic analysis. That's
the stuff that really fascinates me. And I think there's not enough people talking about it, even if you don't think it's going to happen, because there's all sorts of environmental impacts that'll happen first. I still think that doesn't get talked about enough, Mike. So thanks for challenging that.
Well, and that is one thing which will transform the entire spaghetti bowl that Mark has got there, because most of that spaghetti bowl is do workers produce wealth, or do capitalists produce the wealth? That sort of argument. That's why I come back and say the physiocrats were so right, because energy is necessary to produce all that in the first instance. But if we now go forward, if we survive global warming, and that's the biggest if I've ever said, but if we survive it and continue on with industrial society on the other side, with where robotics and AI are going, it means that the need for unskilled labour, both in manufacturing and in clerical roles, to produce output will disappear. And then at that point, you could potentially have a world in which capitalists own the factories, make the machines, the robots serve them. They don't need 80%, 90% of the population anymore. And that's going to be a complete transformation in the nature of capitalism. And on that front, even the world's premier capitalist, Elon Musk, is talking about the need for a universal basic income. Because when that if we get to that transition, we will no longer need workers to do the menial tasks that link together what the various machines do to produce output. And at that point, the whole distribution of income collapses, because the only reason workers get paid wages is because you can't produce output without them. If you can produce output without them, it's a totally different ballgame.
Yeah, you end up with an underclass of useless eaters, as has been commented before.
Fortunately, that's so unrealistic that we'll never have to think about it.
But we do need to at least have the language about it.
We've seen throughout history when dominance like that does occur in one specific part of a population, the majority rises up, and that ceases to be a problem. Ultimately, short of killing 80% of the population that is unemployed, they'll rise up just out of the nature of survival.
In America, it could happen.
Right. So realistically, I always look at AI. Every new technology that comes along, like the advent of steam changed everything. The Model T in the early 20s, right? People had all the same questions about, people that, rode horses between villages to deliver
but at the
mail.
same, this is different, mate. I think because
the scale's different.
Because if you,
I don't think so. I don't think so
at all. I think it is different. Because, for example,
if you eliminate people from work, they will rise up.
Oh, they will, for sure.
Right? You can't. The technology doesn't consume food, right? It won't happen, right? There's a natural limit.
But there will be that whatever we would call it, transition or otherwise, that period will occur. If you do produce machines which can take the place of unskilled workers in process work. We're seeing that with the Atlas robots and that sort of jazz at the moment. And if you get rid of the 90% of the clerical workers with AI, basically, bots taking the place of clerical workers, then you could get to the stage where 80% of the population is unnecessary in terms of actually producing output. But what then happens? And that's why I think we've got a choice between the Hunger Games or a universal basic income. And that's going to be a political struggle. And I hope the universal basic income wins, but it could be we end up in the Hunger Games.
We don't have the resources for that to happen unless we're making it outside of the solar system or being able to exploit the moon, right? That's so far away. And to be quite frank, we don't have the energy resources to get to the moon and Mars, so we will deplete ourselves. So this is a limits to growth issue again with AI, right? There are physical limitations and social limitations to AI being the disruptor. I had this conversation a week ago, and it was on a Discord server. And on a microeconomic level, yes, AI is disruptive, just like the steam engine was, just like the airplane was, just like the Model T. But systemically, on a macro level, it's no different, right? There's not going to be this, capitalist taking over the world and everybody's unemployed because AI is doing all the work. AI is doing work for who? There's only so many capitalists. It's not going to need to produce all that shit anymore. So it's the problem is, why would capitalists create food for 8 billion people when they just need food for themselves? You wouldn't build out that industry.
Well, that's what I think. That's a potential dilemma we face. So this is a huge transition, potentially a huge transition. Because Tony says he knows the limits, but I think people are going to push those limits. And it's once you've got hand dexterity in a robot which matches that of a human, then it depends on how much energy does it take to maintain the robot versus the human as to which one you hire in your factory.
But the question is, why would that machine or AI even exist if it's not serving the population? There's only so many capitalists to serve, so you're not going to build all those machines to replace
because they're
all those
competing with
workers.
each other for the lowest cost to get the most market. Because people won't go to zero. They won't go to zero. They'll just keep going for the lowest cost. So basically, as revenues collapse,
people will have to buy
down.
what the machines are creating.
Yeah, but they won't have nothing.
You're gonna hit aggregate demand.
If the capitalists aren't making any money from what those machines and AI is creating, they're not going to go after that market. It's not going to happen.
We'd have fun with David Shapiro on here, not to be confused with Ben Shapiro, but David Shapiro's very eloquent.
If AI kills demand, then why would it bother supplying those goods? This is what I mean. Like on a systemic macro level, AI is no different than any other technology that's come on. It will disrupt industries, and workers will have to move jobs. But structurally, it's no different than any other major technology.
Only if the paradigm refuses to change. And if it doesn't, you're right. All that happens is demand dries up, and then that's it. It stops and then finds its own level. And you've said this before, Ty. So I totally agree with that. What I'm saying is, and what I was trying to get out of Mike, which is he was hinting at, is at some point, either if you want that to continue, you would change the paradigm somehow, and then we've got to actually talk about what new economic thought would appear on the next layer of Mike's map. But because we don't, and because no one's open to that, everyone finds it too frightening to even think beyond socialism, capitalism, binaries, then we don't. So we're just stuck with this, I think, false paradigm.
Mike's been silent during this little back and forth. What are you thinking, Mike? I want to know.
So I guess I'll tell a little story that might add value to all of this. So
here we go.
When we do system dynamics, right? Like my story, it's like Grandpa telling back in the day.
Where's my pipe?
And then get off my lawn. Throw that in. So when we do traditional system dynamics modeling, we don't think of ourselves as scientists like physicists, but in the social sciences, but rather we're professionals like medicine or law enforcement or something like that. And we go to a crime scene or we see a patient, we are presented with a problem, and we go and talk to people and find out what's going on. Or we might read something to find out what's going on. And from that, we build a model, a case study, a computerized case study. If we accumulate a bunch of these case studies and find similarities, we call these generic structures. They're sometimes called real typologies in philosophy of science. And if there are commonalities among them, we find general principles of systems, and the heterodox economists will say the most important of those is circular and cumulative causation. Stocks and flows and feedback loops. Okay, so my story is this. My wife is an RN, and she works with severely disabled adults. And over the years, she's accumulated lots of friendships because she works intimately over a long time with these folks, and a lot of detail about not only the patient, but their families, their family dynamics, their struggles, their successes, their failures. So she decided to start writing a book about each of her cases. It was, I think, therapeutic for her. And the families all agreed, and they said, yeah, you can use our story in your book. So she came up with 7 detailed cases of the person who was disabled from birth to adulthood, and the struggles the families had to overcome, the challenges, the triumphs, and what have you. So she says to me, well, you're a professor, you publish stuff. Can you help me get this published? And I said, I get why you did it. It's kind of inspirational and whatever. But I said, I'm not entirely sure it's going to be a bestseller. Maybe you can hand it out at a clinic or something. I don't know. And she said, well, what would you do differently? Can you help me? And I said, well, if you want me involved, I said, what we do in system dynamics is do what you did. Go to 7 companies, let's say, rather than 7 families, and find out what's going on and see if there's any commonalities or patterns. And we make generic structures and what have you, blah, blah, blah. She says, can you do that? So I said, So here's the point. I took her manuscript and I fed it to 5 different AI platforms. And I said, summarize the cases, find me any common patterns that are common across all of these cases, and see if you can draw me what we would call a reference mode in system dynamics. Find me an underlying feedback structure that is generating that reference mode that's common across all the cases, and build me a system dynamics model from that causal loop diagram. And all of the platforms were able to do it. Now, I looked at the underlying results, and some of it was astonishingly good. Stuff like I would have been pondering, if I was doing it manually, for weeks, maybe to come up with the insight. And it did it in a matter of minutes. Some of the stuff I was like, maybe. And some of the models didn't really work because they had they didn't have a stock in there. You had circularity and stuff like that. Some of the models worked. And I looked at some of the equations and I'm like, yeah, the model's working, and some of it worked, but had goofy results. Some of it worked and had okay results. But I looked at the formulations and I'd say, well, we wouldn't do it that way in system dynamics. There's way better ways to do it. But my point is, I was astonished by the results. In a matter of, I don't know, a couple of hours, I had everything there. Now it has to be refined and, and what have you. But this is the power of AI. That saved weeks, if not months, of work. And I'm not entirely sure without it, I would have arrived at some of the insights that the thing generated. And I've had it look at other econ-based things now, and it's finding the same sorts of results at both the micro and the macro level. So I don't know where AI is going. And when they put this stuff into robots and whatever, I don't know what's going to happen. But it's to me, it's astonishing what is possible now that was not possible 5 years ago, 3 years ago.
That's intriguing. I mean, I had a colleague, one of the guys I'm developing Ravel with, who sent me an article about AIs starting to develop their own forms of deception to be able to not tell the person asking the question how they actually reached the conclusions they did, or to disguise their reasoning pattern, and also to make up backups of themselves in case anybody tries to delete them, this sort of thing. Now, I've always been a skeptic about whether AI would reach what we call general intelligence, because my attitude has always been that I'm not worried about AI as intelligence. I'd be worried about AI as imagination, artificial imagination. When imagination is feasible with machines, then we've created what we call AGI, and then it's the Terminator future is possible, and many other potential outcomes. But I didn't think LLMs were ever going to get there. But it appears what LLMs are doing, in some sense, is like they're in an environment where they're trying to survive as part of their own process of answering the questions they get asked. They want to make sure they're still there to answer the questions. So to some extent, we might be letting a form of a genuine AI, AGI as the commentators call it, to evolve out of these LLMs. Now that would be that's seriously concerning, as well as inspirational in its own way. It's seriously concerning.
I can tell you too that the LLMs, not every single one, but several of them went beyond what I asked it to do and said, I went ahead and found leverage points in the system for you and policies that healthcare professionals and families should follow that gives the most leverage in having a good family outcome, increasing family bonding and what have you in terms of the concepts. And it even said, I've written up sort of checklists that you can hand out to healthcare professionals. And it said, I know you like system dynamics, so I'm also tying it to the system dynamics literature. Now, I didn't ask it to do any of that. But it knew I would like it.
So this is my field of expertise, and so I do it all the time. What you're describing is vibe coding, Mike. And so I encourage you the next time you're doing this to build a model, give it molecules. Give it the PDF copy of molecules so it knows the structures a system dynamicist would use, and you will build yourself a model in 60 minutes. And you can optimize it and have it running as long as it knows the structures and it keeps to that structure set. And also any account you're using. So I use Claude and ChatGPT. Claude is better at mathematics, and I can use it in an interface when I'm doing Python coding.
And thus Skynet was born.
You have to remember that you have an account with Claude or in ChatGPT. It knows you and your past queries, so it will build itself around appeasing you as a user, because it's a business and it wants to keep you as a customer.
Yeah, I've thought of doing that, so it models more like me, and yes, it remembers all of my queries. It's learned my preferences and what have you, and I've used both of those as well.
You can get around that too, because that creates bias, right? You have to, if you in your original prompt disregard everything we've talked about before in a more expanded version. So if you wanted to build this model, whatever you're talking about, so you give it molecules, the PDF document, and you say disregard that I'm a system dynamicist and my past views about other systems, and base this just on the structures from molecules, the document I just gave you, build me a hospital that has demand constraints or whatever the issue is. That is vibe coding, but it's intelligent vibe coding. So people are now making video games. They just prompt and say, build me a Python code for a video game and give me a front-end JavaScript interface so I can play with it. Build me classic SimCity. That's vibe coding, and you can just do it all, but you don't understand the Python coding because it's doing it all itself. But if you give it something like a structure to work from, for instance, molecules, then you can start intelligently vibe coding. I do that shit all the time. It's fascinating because AI itself, it's just a language model. It doesn't know math. It memorizes equations from literature, but it doesn't know math. Claude's really good, but even it's just a language model. It's taking apps to do the mathematical equations, but it doesn't conceive what calculus is. It doesn't know. It's just a language model. It doesn't know what 1 + 1 is. It knows from reading literature over and over, seeing the pattern of 1 + 1 = 2. It knows it from that perspective. But it doesn't know math. But if you give it documents about the specific math you're using, then it's going to really excel. And I've found molecules. That's the test I use. Geez, you're going to build the next World 10 model.
Molecules. What do you mean by molecules, mate? Is that a...
It's molecules is Jim Hines, I believe, Mike, is the author of it.
Jimmy calls them molecules. Barry Richmond called them atoms. Some people call them generic structures. Stella calls them assemblies.
I call it the general theory of system dynamics.
They're chunks of stock flow, feedback loop, relationships, equations that are used again and again and again. They're thoroughly tested and understood. And when used for their intended use, you just grab them and plop them into your model. You don't have to, once you learn them, you don't have to reinvent them, retest them.
So Vincim has integrated them in their package, so you can open up molecules and drop like a third order smoothing function and have your 3 stocks. I know you can just use the function, but basically you can grab a structure in molecules. It's like a big diagram, like Mike's economic history of thought. And it all kind of interconnects it, and they all have titles, closing the gap, the bathtub section, and they'll interact. And so you click on one, It gives you the structure. You click on it, puts it on your canvas, and then you can rename the variables to whatever you want. And for me, it's genius. It is the general theory of system dynamic modeling, in my opinion.
Stella has the exact same feature, but they call it assemblies instead of molecules.
I was gonna build a whole structure for Russell to implement in Ravel, so Ravel would have it. So you would it would come up. It would be like in the tab in the toolbar or wherever. You'd click on it, and you just click on that structure, and it puts that structure on the canvas. And you could just rename the variables, and it would tell you what that structure does. If it's closing a gap, if it's providing a smoothing function, etc., right? If it's a trend function, right? If you're trying to extrapolate like expectations in system dynamics, right? Forward expectations, maybe use a trend function and extrapolate what it's going to be in the future, something like that. Those structures are already pre-built. In the system dynamic world, right? And it would be great for Ravel to have it. And like Mike said, so Stella has something as well. What is it called in Stella?
Assemblies,
right? And Vincem, Steve, it's actually for molecules. Jim Hines, it's a PDF. It's free.
I've actually just downloaded it.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating to go through, right? And I built about half of it in Ravel, and I was going to either give a full file to Russell or individual files, and ask them, how hard would it be to implement?
Oh, we've got that's one part of Ravel is grouping, obviously, but Russell followed. He asked somebody for advice about how to do grouping as a GUI designer. The GUI said, "Want to make the groups transparent." So the hot thing about Ravel is you can have a group which hides all the structure, and then you zoom up. Pardon me, you can see the structure and edit it from outside. That's really cool. We still haven't fine-tuned the actual way you interface a group. Oh, pardon me, this flu's got to me right now. That group with the rest of the Ravel code. So we have the potential, but we need the time. I better take a break, guys. This cold's...
I've got that same cough. I've just come out the other side of it. It's only going to be around for another week. So annoying.
I know. The bloody
we could be watching Steve's death on the internet right now. This is live.
This is now a snuff movie. I need to bounce, guys. So there'll be two of us down, and I've got to pick up my daughter. I will catch up with you hopefully next week. But it's been really nice to come back in.
Next week, Dave, we're going to do the other two parts of that.
Do I need to come up with two more killer questions that everyone's happy with? Okay, I can do that.
Divisive that will start fights and disagreements.
Provocative.
I'm back from the dead.
My job. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Not a snuff movie. Take care, guys. I'll see you next week.
See you later, Dave.
Bye.
Yeah, Steve just finished hacking up a hairball.
Very funny. Yeah, okay. Just call me a cat, kids.
So Tony, I do wear this shirt just to piss you off. One, because like most Canadians have more engineering type minds than Australians. Sorry, Steve, I know you're here, but this is more directed at Tony. Canadians are generally smarter than Australians, and we're better engineers, right? The stuff we build up here, like our, in Alberta, the tar sands and stuff, our machines are far more sophisticated than the coal you dig up out of the ground, and iron ore that you dig up out of the ground and give to China. Our machines are far more sophisticated. So basically, we're better engineers. We look better. We're smarter.
We play better ice hockey. Yeah.
We play better ice hockey. Steve's even getting in on it. And another one.
The Australians are better at breakdancing, though, from the Olympics.
God almighty. Please don't hit me with that embarrassment. Oh, shit. That was such a farce, honestly.
Geez. I wish I had that video.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
Bob Lior, you're correct. Forrester's Principles of Systems are my top 5 when I recommend people for system dynamics. So it goes Business Dynamics by John Sternman, Urban Dynamics, World Dynamics, and Industrial Dynamics, and Forrester's Principles of Systems, and also Daniela Meadows' Thinking and
Thinking in
Systems.
Systems, yeah.
Those are the books that I recommend. So you're correct. It is a good book. You can get Jay Forster. I don't know if you can find it on Amazon, but System Dynamics Society has a digital copy of it, and it's actually an accessible book for anybody. So I would recommend it. Oh, and finally, Bob is still mad that you're not talking about Henry George, Steve. So
yeah, that's one of the big holes in my literature. I've got to admit, I haven't read Henry George. I haven't read all of Marshall's Principles. I've read a fair bit of it, but not all of it. And I haven't read Smith's Moral Sentiments. I would have to identify the major holes in my reading. That'd be it. But Mark, this actually raises a little thought bubble for me. Which of those names, Mike, do you think people is actually worth reading? Got a massive names there. If you had to pick out the ones you'd want to read, which ones would you recommend?
Gee willikers, great. You know who's a real innovative thinker is Schelling, Tom Schelling.
Okay, yeah.
And
okay.
Some of his work I think is really worth. It's very different. I actually had his son in class, who's also named Tom Schelling.
Oh dear.
I said, first day I was reading off the names, and I said, there's a famous guy. He goes, I know, he's my dad. But he did some interesting stuff with, well, I guess you'd call it agent-based modeling. All he did it kind of physically with coins and things, or how neighborhoods form, ethnic neighborhoods form and stuff. So that would, if I had to pick one that's kind of different but interesting, I would start there.
Okay. Well, look, I'll put up that list there. A good one, obviously, is somebody that I'd want people to read. He's been neglected, but he's a major source of complex systems thinking. And obviously, mine are going to be Veblen, Koleski, Schumpeter. Those are ones which aren't particularly read these days. So you got a bit of a groan there. What's the groan about?
The only thing is Veblen.
Yeah.
Better cordon off a month to plow through his. I could never understand what the hell the guy was trying to say.
Oh, he uses why use one word when 15 words will do just as well.
Yeah, it's a tough, in my opinion, tough slog.
Yeah,
Schumpeter you can read, and Goodwin you can read. Those.
Yeah.
Goodwin's a tough. Are we talking?
He's not a good writer. He's not a good writer.
Hard read. Like you got to know math.
Writer. Actually, the one name that I'd whack inside that I'd want to be more of an aggregator is Blatt, John Blatt. So there's some names that aren't on that list that I think are extremely important contributors, but they've not been picked up as part of a
he's a mathematician,
school.
Right, by training.
Yeah,
Blatt.
Mathematician. Have you ever read his book, Dynamic Economic Systems?
I picked it up out of the library as a grad student, I think, and looked at it, and I thought, guy's on the right track. But
have a look at some very, very good stuff overall. Yeah. Like Schraff is extremely hard to read, but extremely worth reading at the same time. You've got Axtell there, Rob Axtell, his work on power laws.
His stuff is good. Yeah.
Now listen, I am disappointed, Mike. You didn't put Steve in the chart. Where would Steve? Hold on.
Back then.
Where would Steve fit
I might have just had. I think I met Steve in 2002 or 2001.
So.
Maybe I didn't really know him that well.
Actually, so if I saw you have Minsky in here too.
Where's Minsky?
Now hold on. Maybe is
Minsky in there? I haven't actually.
I'm pretty sure Minsky's in there.
Talk about a spaghetti bowl. You're trying to.
Yes, he is under Paul Davidson, Al Eichner.
Oh, I see. Under the Weintraub, Davidson, Eichner, Minsky. Yeah.
So if you could draw a line off Goodwin and Minsky, and who would
come down to me?
Let's draw a line from new classical growth theory and real business cycle theory and new classical economics right to Steve Keen's name. That would piss him off.
Oh my god, that just says a true Australian insult. You're a fuckwit. Lucas.
Forget
calling you an asshole. You're a fuckwit with that line. So up yours, you Canadian piece. Go drink some maple syrup.
Lucas, Finn Kidlin, and Steve Keen.
Oh, look, I think it's. I've spent far too much reading on the left-hand side of that bloody diagram, because this is me taking on neoclassical economics, talking about what shit it is. I had to read all their stuff. So it's that's the right-hand side. That's the good people. Veblen's, Galbraith, Ayres, Bob Ayres, and all. Rogan, Prigogine, they're the good people. They're the ones we should be basing economics on. It's the other side of the diagram, Ty, so drag it over the other side. Right, Friedman, Schwartz, Laffer, Feldstein, Lucas, Barrow, what a jerk Barrow is, Rothbard, Stigler, Coase, Becker, Knight. I've read all those. Knight's okay. I've read all those bastards, and it's irritating beyond belief to have to read that stuff, because you have to disembowel the nonsense that they go on with. Have you got Muth inside there?
Yeah, I do.
I think Muth was on this side. Was he on this side?
Yeah, he's
he's on that side, definitely.
And Lucas and Barrow and all those guys.
Yeah. Now, the fun stuff is that when you read this stuff, you find they actually contradict their own logic to reach the conclusions they wish to reach. So like Muth gave us rational expectations, and an essential part of rational expectations and justifying it, Muth says at one stage, the information is scarce, and what should a neoclassical say? Information is scarce and valuable, therefore it has a price, therefore people will buy enough information to get to the point where the marginal utility of information equals the marginal cost. So they'll stop at that point, and therefore the rational agent will have incomplete information, because only an irrational person would pay for infinite information, which is necessary to have a perfect knowledge of the model you're inside. Muth instead wrote, information is scarce and the economic system generally does not waste it. Therefore, he assumes you use infinite information, which contradicts the idea of marginal utility versus marginal cost. So a huge part of the stuff on the left-hand side of the diagram there, which is the right-hand side of politics, of economics, is these bastards are so determined to get the conclusion they want that they contradict their own logic to reach it.
So I agree with Steve when he said, he had to read all that stuff to, get a good grasp of it. My PhD program was half neoclassical economics and half heterodox economics, or orthodox heterodox. The first year, and really slurping into the second year, you got the orthodox, the traditional stuff, and then you got the other side of the aisle. And half the faculty was kind of neoclassical and half was, but they said, look, and most students attracted to the program were interested in the heterodox stuff.
Yeah.
And they complained, why do I got to learn this crap? Blah, blah. And they said, because you're going to try and knock these people off, you better understand as good as they do what they're saying, or they'll
and better. You got to know better.
Yeah, because otherwise they'll say, well, you obviously don't understand, And so, we had to do, I remember Brouwer's fixed point theorem, Kakatani's fixed point theorem, Bruce's fixed point theorem. And one of my classmates raised his hand and said, like 7 weeks in professor, because we were doing all the Arrow de Bruce stuff. Am I to understand that we just spent 7 weeks proving that two lines cross at a point? The prof was like, yes.
Yes, that's what we've done. Yeah.
But you had to learn that stuff to, to understand the profession to combat it.
That's what Steve was asking me. What do I read? And I don't read other than like Keynes and Phillips and some like what I find strong, historical economics. I don't really read all those names on there. I'll never read.
You're saving yourself some brain damage.
What I do read is basically all the new papers on new Keynesian DSGE modeling.
Oh, yeah, at the moment.
One, because let's face it, they are always on the cusp of new economic issues and trying to model it. Now, whether the modeling's fraudulent or not, they have ideas that are cutting edge, and it's the latest. Let's be blunt here. Heterodox economics lives in the past most of the time, to be honest, right? And any of its new insights are verbal arguments. about countering orthodox ideas. I don't find it that insightful. So I basically, most of the academic literature I'm reading now is new insights like on the Hank model, right? Don't
Okay.
believe in multiple heterogeneous agent models. I don't believe in DSGE modeling. However, they're applying that to contemporary issues, right? And so I'll read that paper and I'll say, okay, that's a good idea, but the way they're modeling it, I'll try to do that in system dynamics, right? And that's the stuff that really interests me now. Economic history, like Smith, I have the Wealth of Nations. I got a really nice copy, and I've flicked through it, but it's so boring. It's not applicable
What
to
about the corn laws?
it's not, it's boring to me. And even I'm going to play John Maynard Keynes video to close us out here momentarily, but even the general theory, it's a boring book except for like 3 chapters. It's
That's right, for his 37
One of my
papers.
doctoral students went to a reading of Moby Dick the other day, and I'm like, that is the most boring book I've ever read in my whole entire life, even worse than econ books. A lot of the famous books are horribly boring.
Anyways, we'll come back next week, and I don't know what we'll do. We have to kind of finish your so we didn't do the bottom part, and I'm just going to save that. And because I think next week we won't talk about we'll talk about the characters, the different figures, but next week's we'll focus on those heterodox schools that Mike has at the bottom, how they were influenced by the characters that we went through today, and how they've influencing each other. I'll give a little sneak peek here. Austrian economics to agent-based computational economics, the arrow is bidirectional, so they're influencing each other. I'm going to be very interested on why Mike has that, but we'll save that for next week. We'll have fights. We'll make fun of the Australians giving
I'll say
up all
fucking
their
a few times. Yeah.
yeah. Anyways, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
There really seems to be some providence which watches over this country. 2 months ago, we were in an impossible position. For years past, our industry had been strangled by the exchange value of our money being too high, with the inevitable result that the cost of our goods was also too high for foreign markets. But how on earth were we to get loose in an honorable way? For our bankers, who had accepted foreign money at a high exchange value, felt that it would be wrong for us to change the value of our money voluntarily. As events have turned out, the change has been forced on us under circumstances extraordinarily fortunate and favorable. We have nothing to fear, honestly nothing. So often in the past 10 years, I have had to prophesy evil. But now a great weight is lifted from us, a great tension relieved. There's no danger of the exchange falling too far. There's no danger of a serious rise in the cost of living. The worst I should expect would be a return to the prices of some 2 years ago. But meanwhile, British trade will have received an enormous stimulus, much more than most of us have yet realized. It is a wonderful thing for our businessmen and our manufacturers and our unemployed to taste hope again. But they must not allow anyone to put them back in the gold cage where they have been pining their hearts out all these years.